Hi, I'm Amit Bouri with the Global Impact Investing Network, and I'm here in San Francisco at the GIIN's West Coast Impact Forum. And I'm really excited to be in conversation with Jessica Droste Yagan, who leads Impact Engine. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Jessica, I'd love to hear a little bit about your work at Impact Engine and how you think about impact investing from a family perspective.
Yeah, maybe it's helpful to share a little bit about kind of how I got to this point,
Please,
why I'm so excited about all of this work. I spent my whole career and almost whole life really obsessed with the idea of how do you align capitalism, social good more effectively. So as you know, I spent a decade at McDonald's Corporation looking at how to build the sustainable sourcing there. And so I really got excited about the impact investing space about, 13, 14 years ago. And sort of in parallel, have been building out my own family's commitment to trying to get to 100% impact align across all of our assets that we manage, but also leading Impact Engine as an organization, which is where my family puts a lot of resources into our private equity and venture capital asset allocation, but also where we try to create leverage to bring in other capital and put it into really impactful investments.
Well, it's great to hear kind of your journey. And one of the things I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about is how do you think about impact investing kind of across asset classes? And how do you think about the role of market rate capital, but also those more impact first investments that may not have the same type of risk return profile, but could be incredibly impactful and also possibly actually really well performing?
Yeah, I think the really cool thing about how far the market has evolved is that now you really can do impact investing across all asset classes. Perhaps with the exception of hedge funds, if you were to consider that an asset class or something you're trying to cover. But 10 years ago even, right, you couldn't say that. So now so much more is possible. In terms of this idea of market rate versus impact first, I'm not a big fan of that binary way of thinking. I really try to think about it as I believe that impact first people sort of are insinuating that you're giving up some kind of financial return. You don't necessarily have to be giving up financial return. It's really about either you're starting with a problem to solve and you're saying what kind of financial tool can solve it. And then on the vice versa, on the market rate, people are saying oh, well, you're not going to give up anything, right, to get this kind of impact. And I would argue that the market in general, because it doesn't account for impacts at all, you're probably giving up something there. So I tend to try to think of it more of can we be really intentional and knowledgeable and transparent about what financial return do we expect in this investment and what kind of impact do we expect in this investment, and as much as possible kind of create the tool or the type of investment that delivers whatever it is you're trying to get from both a financial and return perspective.
Yeah. Well, that thinking resonates a lot with how we think about it as well. And we also think about there's a role of investors who really have a strong appetite for innovation. They like doing new things. They don't like doing things the fifth or sixth time over. They really want to kind of tinker, develop new business models. And then there's others who really like things that are scale and proven. They like fourth and fifth time fund managers. Sometimes it's actually driven by regulation. They may be like a big insurance company or something that has a lot of internal policy and compliance things that really constrain what they can do. To solve problems at scale, we need both. We need those who will kind of help develop the new models and then those who can help bring them to scale. But I do think that orientation around problem solving is at the heart of this.
Yeah.
Kind of how do we actually figure out how to solve problems for people? How do we think about solving environmental problems? One of the things that I think is so important about your work is you also work and connect with other families who are thinking about impact investing. There's a lot of conversation about different generations and their role in thinking about impact investing and their conviction around it. What do you see and how do you think about younger generations and younger members of families and how they influence the overall family approach?
Yeah, first I'm going to make a quick comment on the idea of people wanting to solve problems, which I think is one way people come to impact investing, right? I really want to address climate change. I really want to address gender inequality. And that's very valid and real, and those are real problems. I would argue that where we need people to realize is that there's also an opportunity to look well beyond addressing specific one-off thematic problems. And recognizing that, in particular for really big owners, what called universal owners, where you have exposure to the entire economy of the world, it's more than just like I need to solve problems for other people, like gender inequality, but rather recognizing that if we aren't investing in some things like in reducing inequality, addressing climate change, like the whole world economy will suffer.
Right.
So I also think there's a lot of self-interest that people haven't quite all figured out yet.
Yeah.
In addition to the like, sort of heart desire to solve problems.
Well, and on that point, I do want to come back to the younger family members, but that's a really important point. We see that a lot actually with long-term investors, who I think increasingly are starting to recognize that if they want to generate long-term financial returns, they need a sustainable economy, which means they need a sustainable society, and they need a sustainable planet. So if you're a pension fund saying, I need to pay people back, 30, 40, 50 years, and these are workers, nurses, firefighters, people who work really hard their whole life, and they depend on you. Or if you're just a household saving, and you're thinking about future generations and or your own retirement, and you need to think about that. It's that long-term horizon, I think, creates a lot more openness to thinking about impact and how do we actually not just navigate a changing world, but actually try to influence it for the better.
Absolutely, and to tie back to the point about younger generations, I think about families, historically, wealthy families, family offices are about like, we're accumulating wealth to hand down to future generations. And one thing I think about and kind of talk to others about is like, what good is it to hand down wealth if you're also handing down a world where, for example, maybe wealthy people are not welcome, right? Because there's so much inequality, or the planet is so destroyed that you actually, can't go on vacation and enjoy it. Or, like this idea that again, there is a certain amount of self-interest in everybody, no matter how altruistic and emotionally driven you might be. And especially when it comes to capitalism, as you know, it's like why we have this system and it works. So I think there's this opportunity to kind of say like, like when I think about what I'm handing to my kids, it's like I'm really trying to think about the big picture. What kind of life do I want them to be able to live?
Of course. And I think that's such a powerful motivator. And I think this point you raise also about thinking about, kind of how, our entire economic structure is built around this and how corporations play a role in this as well. Well, I'd love to hear about your experience at McDonald's. And one of the things that we see a lot of interest in is certainly corporates can play a very big role in influencing kind of the, how we see the economy structured and if there's more sustainability embedded in it. We're seeing growing interest among corporates in impact investing. Some of it's actually coming from treasury investing, to help meet their broader purpose agenda. Some of it's thinking about their supply chain. And if they want to commit to sustainability or regenerative practices, how do they engage with impact investors in partnership or use impact investing to help drive progress towards those goals?
Yeah, I think corporations are tricky, right? So I worked with McDonald's for about a decade. I know a number of others who have been in similar roles in other companies. We've all read about some of the initiatives that these corporations have taken on. There are huge, big entrenched incentives and structures in place for publicly traded companies that make it really hard to think long term, right? And so to the extent that you're seeing corporations lean in on things like impact investing, investing in resilient supply chains, et cetera, it's where they can make a market case. Otherwise, it does not make sense, not because they don't care, but because they're evaluated on a quarterly basis.
Right.
And so, that was my job at McDonald's, right? It was like to help find as many market cases as possible, right? And luckily, there are a lot of them. And to your point about time, the easiest way to increase the number and type of market cases is to increase the time frame on the ROI. Right. So because if you're like, my ROI is going to be measured tomorrow, abuse all your workers, throw all the pollutants in the river, you will never be held accountable. You just get to save the costs, no problem, right? So very unaligned with the kind of values and sustainability. If you say you have to hold this stock for 20 years, or as the CEO, for example, of McDonald's, then you're starting to think okay, it's suddenly very aligned with the types of decisions you want to make around carbon and inequality and important issues like that. So I think, we have to be aware of how the structures are built and what the constraints are, because I honestly don't believe, a lot of people are like, oh, these corporate CEOs are evil and greedy and whatever, and I just generally think that's mostly not true. There's probably a few, but like that's mostly not true. And they're working within a system that we're all part of.
Right.
So when I'm talking to impact investors, who are the ones who like, can own these types of companies and can have a voice, like, are you voting your proxies? You're probably not big enough to speak up yourself, but are you pressuring whatever bank you're part of to speak up, because they're probably a much bigger owner than you collectively. And I think that's like together how we kind of get it moving in the direction where we can empower corporations to take more action.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, going back to kind of the family perspective and kind of what your experience has been there, you end up getting contacted by other families who are thinking about impact investing, and we would love to hear kind of what's the advice that you give them?
I mean, it's so different, right? It's so personal. When you're a family and you're just like, what does this mean to me, my family, my values? What's the history of my family and the money we have to invest and why? And what are our future needs? And so it's obviously very complicated. I would say I tend to talk about like 3 main reasons why people do it. And just to kind of help people thinking about like, 'cause usually they come to me and it's like, I heard of this, like kind of, how do I think about it? I think one is simply like, alpha, or like, thinking about smart investing. Generally speaking, families are long-term investors. And again, the longer term, the more aligned with sustainability type issues. The longer term, the more you really do need to care about these issues that can really disrupt your portfolio in the future. And so when you're thinking about alpha and just smart investing, I think being aware of impact opportunities, being aware of risks in your portfolio that you might not, negative risks in your portfolio, start to just become like very smart investing. I think 2, most families who have wealth to invest also have wealth to give away. And I think, trying to point out to them my belief, which is that it's extremely inefficient to maximize profit and then maximize philanthropy. So essentially you're taking like, let's make as much money as possible without regard to these issues we care deeply about. And then you're taking profits from that to try to fix issues you care deeply about, right? It's like the environment. And that's just like on its face inefficient. So if you really care, if we really care, like just go in optimizing from the beginning instead of maximizing and then maximizing. And I just think it's a much more efficient way to run the system. And then lastly, sort of the heart, the values. I don't want to profit from the planet suffering or other people suffering. And if you don't know what you're invested in, you probably are. Like, not because you're trying to, but just like because it naturally happens in the system. There are some positive externalities, as they've historically been called, in what I'll call blind capitalism, right, where you're just trying to maximize profit. And there are a lot of negative externalities. And so if you aren't actually paying attention, trying to push toward positive, trying to remove negative, you're absolutely contributing to both. And most families who have these values they want to impart to their kids, are saying like, oh yeah, like I won't be able to sleep well at night, right? If I actually don't know where did these profits come from, like on whose back, or from what part of our biodiversity or whatever.
Yeah. Well, before we close, I'd love to bring some of this thinking to life and just hear a little bit about some examples that you'd give around impact investments that you've been involved in that you've felt particularly kind of passionate about.
Yeah, I know we talked about this before, and it's like really hard to pick because I just feel so excited about so many of them. I'll share 2 examples. One I'll call kind of the term impact first, where it's like you're trying to solve an impact problem and then you're trying to find what is the right solution to solve it. And in this case, I see it as like a complement to philanthropy. And it's an investment called Lift Up Enterprises. It's based in Chicago. And it's really a social enterprise that's trying to run historically labor-intensive, low-wage service offerings and service workers with integrity and support for those workers to actually like lift themselves up. So things like landscaping, snow removal, office cleaning. Really, really thoughtful about it. And I think it's a great example of where instead of giving philanthropy, because that is one way to help people in poverty, Another way is to actually fund a business model that, to the extent that it can become sustainable and scalable, can actually help more and more people over time. So essentially, in addition to paying a living wage, they're providing like wraparound supports, English skills, finance skills, connections for kids and cousins to like have access to services, et cetera. Another example that I'll call kind of more on the closer to want to make a lot of money and do a lot of good side of the equation is a company we've invested in through Impact Engine, which is called PadSplit. And it's a marketplace for affordable housing. So affordable housing is a common topic in the impact investing space. It's a common topic in any city or state conversation. Federal, it's a big issue in our country. PadSplit is essentially taking the supply of single family homes, which is actually technically sufficient in this country to house all the people, allowing it to be easy to transition those homes to multi-unit residences, and then providing the marketplace to manage the members who are essentially renting rooms inside a single family home and shared common space. So the homeowner actually makes more rent than renting it as a single family home. You're providing housing for 3 or 4 or 5 units instead of 1, which would have been a single family home. So you're using that square footage more effectively. And they've done all the very, very heavy lifting of like, how do you manage like roommate relationships? How do you collect payments, give the payments back? They're growing so well. I think they have 19,000 active affordable housing units now that did not exist before. So that's one that I'm really excited and proud about.
Well, those are great examples. And it's been so wonderful to have you here at this event. And thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.